Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Blumberg, and I am Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, What Library School Didn't Teach You, Know Your Coworkers, and also welcome today's presenter, Linda Bruno. Linda has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified with DDI and Achieve Global. Please welcome Linda and enjoy her webinar. Linda?
Thank you so much, Erin, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. If you were here last month, and I see some familiar names, but not all of them familiar from last month, you know that we touched on the idea of personalities, or what I like to call behavioral tendencies. And we talked about knowing yourself at that point, and we were kind of guessing as to which category we might fall into because we didn't really take an assessment. We were just kind of getting to know the different categories. So today we're going to delve into that a little bit deeper, as I promised, when we talk about knowing your coworkers. But before we get started with that, I know that some of you were not at the last session, but Aaron and I came up with a bit of a process, if you will, where we are testing the idea of sending out between webinar emails to remind you of what we talked about at the last session, to give you some probing questions to reflect on regarding what you learned at that session and so forth. So I kind of want to take a little bit of a pulse to see if those of you who have gotten any of those emails, we've only sent out 2 because we just started the first of the year. If you are finding those helpful, number one, if you would raise your hand, and if you have not been in attendance up to this point, if you think you would find them helpful. Okay, I see Kim found it helpful. Thank you, Kim, so much. And I see several people are saying they either did or would, so that's all good. I just like to check in with that because I don't want to bombard you with a bunch of emails that aren't really going to be helpful. So thank you so much for responding to that. You can lower your hands and we will proceed. A couple of the things that we talked about in that last email, for those of you who didn't get it or weren't at the last session or just want a little bit of a reminder, we talked at the very beginning about emotional intelligence and about how much we need to be aware, self-aware when we are working with people. And then we need to learn how to manage that. And I mentioned to people in that last email, we need to ask ourselves the question, why? As a matter of fact, I got an email just the other day from someone, and I had done a workshop with them several months ago. And I always invite people, as I do you, contact me at any time, whether it's tomorrow or 5 years from now, if you have any questions. And she was saying that she was struggling with getting along with somebody at work. And so, at the risk of stepping on toes, which you all know I'm willing to do if it helps you learn, I wrote back to her and I said, okay, here are some things I'm hearing, and I'm hearing a lack of self awareness here because she was talking about how upset she was with this other person. And I said, let's go back a step and find out why you were upset. So when you're thinking about working with your coworkers and the fact that maybe there might be 1 or 2 that aggravate you, you need to step back and see what your behavioral tendency is that might be encouraging that aggravation, if you will. Not encouraging in a good way, but it might be instigating the aggravation because there's a difference in your behavioral tendencies. So that's what we're kind of going to talk about today. And I always like to reiterate that no behavioral assessment that you take, whether it's from an actual degreed psychologist or whether it's from a certain workshop or a book that you got or whatever, none of those assessments are 100% accurate, are they? I've never seen one that somebody says, oh my gosh, there's not one thing missing from this. This is exactly me. However, I have seen hundreds of people who have said, oh, this is so close to me, it's scary. So we just need to figure that out as we're talking about the different behavioral tendencies. Another thing that we talked about in February was what would we like to do to improve our people skills? And we heard things like self-control and I need to stop and think. And I want you to think about this as we're looking at the title, Know Your Coworkers. And we're talking about self-control. I need to stop and think, quit letting things bother me that I don't have control over, being aware of my own personality and how it can be perceived, balancing the emotional with the rational, exercising more self-talk, putting myself in others' shoes, think and then talk. So the question becomes, how can we do that when we're working with our coworkers? Because all of the things that I just mentioned can affect how we work with our coworkers. So if you've got your handouts in front of you, I would highly encourage you to use those today as we go through the different behavioral tendencies and we pull out what the strengths are and what the challenges are of each tendency. If you don't have your handouts, the link was sent to you in your email confirming your registration and reminding you of today's session. So those are always very helpful. And one of the things I tell people is even if you don't want to fill them out today, they make a great little mini manual when you collect them because it might be 7 months from now and you think, I remember us talking about that in that one particular webinar, and you can flip right back to your handouts and find out what we talked about. So those are for your use, but there's certainly no handout police that says you have to use them. So let's talk about who these people are. We know that if you were here at the last session or if you've been in any of my sessions where we talk about the different behavioral tendencies, there are 4 of them based on the assessment that I use. And the assessment that I use is called Wired That Way, and it's by Florence and Marita Littauer, so that you know what I'm getting this information from. But there's the popular, as you see in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, the happy-go-lucky, people-loving, charming, fun person. There is the powerful that is up on the right-hand side of that slide, the upper right-hand slide, that is very goal-oriented, very intent on getting things done and so forth. There's the perfect person down in the left corner that's very detail-oriented, very schedule-oriented. Then there's the peaceful person that just kind of takes it easy in the lower right-hand corner. So I'm going to throw a question out to you. And some of you may have heard this before, but based on those 4, popular, powerful, perfect, and peaceful, which do you think is the most common in the library field? Would you just type that into the chat box? Which of those 4, popular, powerful, perfect, or peaceful? And some of you already know the answer because you've heard me say it before. And some of you will just figure it out on your own. Oh, very interesting. I love the mix that I'm getting today. All of them, Gail says, yes. Here's the actual statistics. And I think the reason we're getting a lot of popular answers today is that you all deal with people. But the popular is not necessarily just about dealing with people. It's about that's what they want to do. They like to be in crowds. They're very fun loving. They're kind of loud and creative and colorful and so forth. In reality, the perfect is the one that scores highest when I give these assessments. The actual assessment itself, the perfect has the highest percentage in the library field. And I deal almost exclusively with libraries unless I have a friend ask me to help them in their organization. I would say 99% of my work is with libraries and has been for about 12 to 15 years. So I've given out this assessment hundreds of times, and the perfect is by far the highest ranking category, followed by the peaceful. It, of course, depends on the blend that I have in a group. For instance, if I have all children's librarians, indeed, it's going to be mostly popular. Marcia said, I found one online. I scored the same for both powerful and perfect. And we do that often, Marcia. And all of us, let me be very clear. I shouldn't say all of us because I don't give this assessment to every human being that's alive, but most of us have at least a little bit of all 4, don't we? I have very little popular and peaceful in me. But now that I know a lot about those different styles, I can pull out the popular or the peaceful parts of me when that's appropriate. Let's say I'm in a meeting and I'm talking about training, but I am not the project manager. There's somebody else doing the actual heading up of the training. I can now convince myself to sit back and take kind of a back seat and give information when I'm asked for it. But many years ago, before I knew my style, my inclination would be to kind of take over because I'm a powerful. So when you think about that, we need to pull out those different pieces when we can or when we need to, and not use any of this as an excuse as a way to either behave with somebody or as a way to treat them, because it's not meant as an excuse, it's meant as a tool. So I have found very dramatically that this particular set of information has actually changed my life since I started studying it and using it about 15 years ago. It's changed my personal life and it's changed my professional life because now I understand myself better. Marcia says I'm a YS Library Associate, so I pull out popular when I'm in story time, programs, and the desk. Absolutely. And we can easily do that, can't we? And a natural tendency for a children's librarian is the popular. A natural tendency for a person who comes into a library, let's say an academic library, and the goal is to rise up the ladder, that might be a powerful and that might be a natural tendency for them. Peacefuls tend to be the second category that's highest in libraries, partly I think because of the legacy of libraries, if you will, as being quiet, peaceful places. Now we know, all of us, that libraries are not quiet, peaceful places anymore, which is wonderful. But peacefuls are still drawn to the actual ambiance and the environment and so forth a lot of times. And Marcia said, I need a whole different personality on the adult desk. Absolutely. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a background of where those styles came from and where they originate as far as their descriptions and so forth. And we're going to, like I said, dig a lot deeper today so that you get a real sense of which one you might be. So there are the 4 styles in front of you. They are on your handouts, so you won't have to write a lot of this down. But we are going to work together on page 1 of the handouts to figure out what the strengths are, which are already listed for us, but compared to the challenges. And here's something that we need to be aware of. Many times when a strength is overdone, it becomes a weakness. And that's what I want you to think about as we're working through page 1 and page 2, looking at those weaknesses on the right-hand side of the page. So we talked a little bit about primary personality styles, and you can think about that a little bit more as we're reviewing some of those traits. Some of you already know, and you're good to go. Some of you are still trying to ponder where you might fall. And I've had people tell me that they are equally all 4. And that is probably because that person has adapted in different situations, which we all do and should do. But what I'm trying to get to for you is not only for you, but for your coworkers, who are we at our core? Because guess what? When we're frustrated, when somebody's stepping on our last nerve, when we aren't feeling well, when we've got a sick spouse or significant other or child, and we've got all of that stress of life on us, the real us is what bubbles to the surface and typically in our weaknesses. So that's why it's so important for us to understand, yes, we are all capable of adapting and doing whatever needs to be done based on a particular behavioral tendency. But we also need to know what's really at our core because we kind of lose our grip sometimes. Remember, we talked about emotional intelligence at the very first session. And sometimes our emotions take over. Often they take over because that's the first place all of our senses go is through the emotional part of our brain. And if we don't understand who we really are at our core, those emotions can take over and kind of get away from us. I want to read this last comment. Jordane said, this is somewhat of a misconception that most libraries are peaceful. Yes, exactly, Jordane. It's not, I want to be clear. This is actually coming from assessments that these folks take, and they are not the highest category. The perfects are. However, the people that I've actually had an opportunity to talk to about this tell me that one of the things that they enjoy about their library environment is that compared to, let's say, a restaurant, a bank, a retail store, those kinds of places, an assembly line in a factory, that still the environment of a library tends toward peacefulness. So I think that's where that idea and perception is coming from. But actually, when we do the assessment, the perfect usually is the highest number in the room. Not always. Every once in a while, I'll get a group that something else scores highest in the general group, but often it's perfect. So let's talk about the popular sanguine. A lot of you guessed that that was the most common in the library field. There are certainly a lot of them out there. In some groups, I only have 1 or 2 out of 20. And again, when I ask them what their job is, it's either outreach or it's children's librarian or it's liaison in the community or something like that, where they're really mingling with people on a regular basis, and that's what they thoroughly enjoy. So if you think about the strengths of a popular, and those are listed on the left side of page 1, the top half. Lots of good, fun things there. And be thinking about these strengths as we're going through this to try to determine which one you might actually be highest in. And I always try to qualify that. I'm not going to say that's your category, but if you're highest in that category, those are your tendencies. And I love that word when we're talking about personalities, because none of us is 100% one way or the other. It's our tendency, and that's what we need to think of. So I'm going to challenge you all in the chat box to pick out one of those strengths and decide what you think an actual weakness might be as that strength is overdone. So just tell me which one you're picking, which strength, and what might be. I'm sorry, Marcia. I'm sitting here, just sitting here. I'm not touching anything, and I apologize for the mic going in and out. I hope everything is okay. So tell me what those strengths. Thanks, Erin. I appreciate that. Sometimes I do get kind of active. I probably look more like Deb. My hands are moving around more than they should sometimes. But actually, that time I was just sitting here with my hands down. So, which one of those strengths would you like to guess at what the weakness might be? John said, loves fun, wants to party all the time. That's exactly right, John. If we overdo loving fun, which is a great thing to do in a library, it can be perceived as wanting to party all the time. And then other styles, if you will, perceive that as not getting the work done, right? So then that becomes a little bit of a challenge for coworkers. Likes flexibility, can be too easygoing. And when you like flexibility, you also can. Yes, too easygoing is a good way to term that, Eva. And then also, you don't really follow the rules that need to be followed, right? So that's a challenge. I'm going to move one of my chat boxes a little bit and see if I can. There we go. Let me move my chat box. Oops, move my chat box here a minute so it scrolls up a little easier. There we go. Okay, so let me go back here a minute. Likes flexibility, too easygoing. Absolutely. Michelle said a sense of humor, which is wonderful. And the negative of that might be, Michelle, you didn't mention that, but I'm just going to fill in the blank here because it might be down farther in my chat box. But the negative of a sense of humor is if it's overdone, it can be kind of biting, can it? It can be kind of sarcastic, and then people's feelings get hurt. You need to be aware of that in your own environment. If you think you have mostly popular tendencies, you have a great sense of humor. And people laugh and they have a great time with you, and that's what makes you popular. However, be aware of other people who do not have that particular style, and their feelings might be hurt. So that's why we have to be a little careful of that. Flighty also can be perceived for the popular, and it's still scrolling up kind of funny. I think Adobe's trying to mess with us today. And Kathy says the people person can be too trusting. Yes, they absolutely can, and they can get a bit distracted from details and tasks. Jordane says a sense of humor. Sometimes it's a challenge for them to get out of that mode. Exactly, Jordane, and attach the level of seriousness that is required, or even the level of detail, right? Because we're having fun, we're joking around, and we're kind of ignoring what might actually need to be done at that point. Liking flexibility, bad with following schedules. Exactly. And then people get upset about that because you know what? Everybody else had to follow the schedule. So it gets a little frustrating for people. Gail said loving fun. Yes, they do love fun, but it can be overdone. John said positive, not wanting to confront people. Elaine said yes. Elaine said sense of humor over difficult things. Yes. I'm going to move this up again because it's still not scrolling right. So we're going to see if we can get this to behave. Okay, here we go. Yes, with the positive part and not wanting to confront people, they don't always, they want to be liked, right? So that's what makes it a challenge for them. You all have great comments in there. You're getting exactly what we're talking about. Always turning the situation into a good experience when it's not always a good experience, right? Alyssa said super positive people can drive people nuts when they're feeling negative. Exactly. You know, you've got the worst day in the world going on with a lot of heavy duty stuff, and they're saying, oh, it'll all be okay. And you're thinking, get out of my face, right? Gail said loving fun, not taken seriously. And Lisa also said loving fun may lack direction and focus. Absolutely. I think you've hit on all the ones that I talked about here. Loving fun, meaning it seems like they're partying all the time. The charming piece we didn't touch on, and we kind of need to be aware of that, especially if this is our tendency. We can come across as a con artist if we're popular. And the reason that happens is we don't intend to manipulate people, but I might go up to Deb and say, you know, you are so good at Excel spreadsheets, Deb. Would you mind doing this for the board meeting? And Deb's feeling pretty proud of herself for being so good at Excel, so she does it for me. And about the fourth time I've asked her to do it, Deb is feeling abused and Deb is feeling like I've conned her into something. So it's just something good for us to be aware of. People person, we visit too much. Liking flexibility, several of you mentioned you make flexibility sometimes. This is the person that comes into the meeting 5 minutes late, but they bring donuts so that everybody's still happy with them. But the trouble is, people aren't happy with them because they're tired of this happening. They're tired of showing up on time, and this person doesn't. But this person loves flexibility. And as you see, not always realistic and can be sarcastic. So there are challenges there no matter which category we fall into: popular, powerful, perfect, and peaceful. And that's why it's so important for us to understand them. Same thing with the powerful. Just pick one: born leader, sees the big picture, delegates, all good things, loves a challenge. We know that work is challenging these days, likes change. Well, the libraries are changing by the hour, it seems like now. And unemotional, which is good. You don't want to bring a lot of emotions and get really involved in people's drama if you can help it. So those are all good things. John said unemotional, insensitive, absolutely. And sometimes this is a perception, but sometimes it's just the way that person is if they're working in their weaknesses. Kim says the born leader can be too bossy. And Jordane said the born leader can be uncompromising. Yes, yes, both of those. Plus the insensitive part. You don't bring the person that's the popular or even the peaceful in to lay off 732 people at a large corporation, do you? You probably bring in the powerful who can be insensitive and can be bossy and can be uncompromising. If you have a comment, if you would like to just type that into the chat box, because all of the microphones are off today, so you're feel free to type that into the chat box. Unemotional comes across as nasty or harsh. Yes. Negative micromanager. Yes, for the born leader. Yeah, they want to control everything. And Marcia said they like change, so they want to constantly change things whether or not we need it. And John said seeing the big picture, which is a wonderful attribute, right? But that doesn't mean they're realistic about how to get there, the actual means of getting to that big picture. So all of the above. And as Vera said, they might also miss the details, miss the specifics, miss the people aspect, right? From that being unemotional. So they see the big picture, but because they can be unemotional, they might even miss what's going on with the people. So I think we've touched on most of these. Yes, Gail, no empathy. I put bulldozer. You all said bossy. Absolutely. Seeing the big picture, ignoring details. They can delegate, which is a positive thing as a leader, if that's what they're doing, but it can also mean that they dump things on people. They love a challenge, so they're easily bored. If you work with this person, remember we're talking about knowing your coworkers. Maybe it's a coworker and this person gets easily bored. This might be something that would help you help them overcome that, because more projects could be sent their way. If you supervise someone who is a powerful and they get easily bored, now you know why. They love a challenge. They like change, so they make it whether you need it or not. And as you all said, when they're unemotional, they can seem very unfeeling and can actually be unfeeling, because some of these weaknesses aren't just perceptions, there are actual behaviors. The perfect melancholy. Look at the good stuff on that on page 2. Genius prone. Remember I said this is usually the highest percentage in a library. Analytical. Makes sense. Self-sacrificing. Makes sense. You all do that. Sensitive, meticulous, schedule-oriented. What might be some of the negatives of that based on what we've just talked about? what might be some of the genius prone Sheldon from Big Bang. Exactly. No common sense, right, Marcia? I always think of him when I see that. I love listening to him because it fascinates me. I can't even get my head around most of the stuff he says, but that's exactly right. And if you've ever watched the show Young Sheldon, it's even funnier because you see what he must have been like as a child, and it would drive you crazy if you actually had to deal with it, probably. So, absolutely, genius prone. Let me scroll back up here. Comes across as a know-it-all, Alyssa said. Absolutely. And Kim said schedule-oriented means too rigid. Now remember, we've got the popular who loves flexibility, and we've got the perfect melancholy who loves schedules, which could mean some real tension. And Michelle said the same thing. It's too rigid. Dane said analytical, you overthink, overcomplicate simple issues. Yeah, because that genius prone part, and we talked about no common sense, then they get analytical. We call that analysis paralysis because the analysis becomes the whole deal. And they tend not to delegate because nobody else can do it exactly, right? The perfect is very good at what they do. They're very meticulous. So they don't really always want to delegate because they know nobody else will do it perfectly. They can lack creativity, Kathy, absolutely, because they're so focused on those details and those specifics. And Thomas said his way is always right, or her way, right, Thomas? Either one. Their way is always right. John said schedule oriented, subordinating people to tasks to be done. Yes, subordinating people to the tasks to be done. I had to read that with a different emphasis. I understand what you're saying there. The people aren't as important as the tasks, right, John? And overthinking things. All of the above. So you can see, yes, and being sensitive, they wear their feelings on their sleeves. They get hurt fairly easily. So you've got the popular making these cute jokes that you might find hilariously funny, and you look over and your coworker is closed off now, might even have their arms crossed, might have even left the area because it hurt their feelings. And Melody said the perfectionist never gets anything finished. Exactly. They work and work and work at it, but it's not perfect, so we've got to rework it again. When I used to do programs with people that were looking for jobs, and we would have perfect melancholies come into our sessions, and they would want to spend the entire session putting in commas and putting spaces in here and there instead of actually using the resume as a tool to get a job. The resume was the end result for them. And we would have to say, you've got to let that part go. Yes, you want the details to all be exact, but let's get on paper who you really are first, and then we can go back and format it. But instead, they would get very focused. Part of the reason they would get very focused on the actual wording and so forth was that it allowed them to avoid something that is very wishy-washy. And that's when you start putting things down on a resume and interviewing. There's no right or wrong. There's no black or white. There's no 100%. It has to be done this way. And that was very stressful for those folks. Alice said self-sacrificing, easily to take advantage of. Absolutely. Yes, Marcia, English majors. My husband was an English major and he could drive me crazy with this. This is my secondary, so we could drive each other crazy. Yes, Alyssa, librarians. That's one of the reasons I think that they love that atmosphere because you know what? You don't build a new library and take in a truckload of books and just start putting them on the shelf by color, do you? Because you'd never find them. Although I know some of your patrons think you should be able to find the big blue book with gold lettering. I know that. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so, again, that structure, that orderliness, if you will, is attractive to a perfect melancholy. I think you got all of them. The genius prone, no common sense, the analysis paralysis, being a martyr. This is the person that says, don't worry about me. I'll stay here through lunch. You all go have a good time. And by about the fourth time they do that, you say, bye-bye. Okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go have lunch because it gets a little old after a while if they're working in their weaknesses a lot. As you all said, you wear your feelings on your sleeves, as John said. So when this person is sensitive, they also can come across as being moody. And the meticulous part, which we didn't touch on, kind of comes into that analytical part, but they can get a little obsessive. And it's important to understand that about yourself or about your coworker. It's not that they're trying to drive you crazy, it's that they really want to make sure it's right. And guess what? When they're working in their strengths, that is a huge bonus, isn't it? That somebody's kind of watching over things to make sure everything's where it needs to be. And of course, when they're too schedule oriented, it can be rigid. This is the person that's at the meeting 10 minutes early because anything after 10 minutes early is late to them. And once the meeting is due to start and everybody's not there, they are already irritated and they are thinking in their minds, why did we schedule a meeting for 9 o'clock? Because just like always, we're not going to start till 9:10. And so you've built up some friction with coworkers there before you even get started discussing topics that might cause friction. The friction has already been created because we set the time for 9 o'clock, but the populars might drag in at 5 after. The peacefuls might come in a little late because they just didn't quite get around to getting their stuff together before they got there. And this doesn't always happen. These are generalities, and that's only happening when people are working in their weaknesses, which hopefully none of your coworkers ever do, right? None of them. Good thing you don't work in my office because I'm the only coworker you would have, and I'm pretty sure I fall into some of these things. Yes, Karen, they can be a bit passive aggressive, especially in the self-sacrificing piece where they get frustrated because everybody's taking advantage of them, but they've allowed that to happen. So then we go on to the peacefuls. This is the person I want to be when I grow up. Easygoing, laid back, consistent with things. I have a good sense of humor, but it's kind of dry. I'm making this up because this is not me. Peaceful and agreeable. This is not me. I can pull this out when I need to, but it happens to be one of my very small scores. So thinking about this, what do you think a weakness might be of the peaceful? Just go ahead and type that into the chat box. What might a weakness be? And I think, Karen, when you said that about the perfect melancholies being passive aggressive, that's absolutely true. They can do that. And even powerfuls can be passive aggressive, but they usually tend toward the aggressive side when they're working in their weaknesses. But the peacefuls, too, if you think about it, can be passive aggressive because they go along and they go along and they go along, and something finally gets on their nerves to the point where they blow up. And this is when people at work say, why is Deb so upset? She never gets upset with anybody. Well, she's had enough. And when they've had enough, it can be a real surprise to people because they've been very consistent and easygoing along the way. So when you're thinking about the people you work with, consider this, or yourself, of course, if this is you. Make sure you're communicating before it ever gets to the point of being passive aggressive. And as Marcia said, finding the easy way may not be the best way. It might be the easiest, but that doesn't mean it's the best way. This is the person that might put things off and put things off until finally they do it, but they don't do it well because they waited till the last minute, and they will tell you they work under pressure very well. But what that really means is they get it done at the last minute, whether or not it's the best way it could have been done, like Marcia said. They can also miss important information, as Joanne said. And Kathy said they can't handle conflict. And what appears to be conflict to them might just be a disagreement for us. Like John said, peaceful and agreeable, they just avoid disagreement. It might even just be a strong discussion, but they feel like it's conflict. They feel it as conflict a lot quicker than the other styles would. And as Thomas said, they procrastinate, sometimes to the point of messing up their coworkers because the coworker needs to get things done and this person is just kind of going on whatever pace they want to go on. Vera said they may be taken advantage of, absolutely. And think about a powerful who just wants to get things done, doesn't have a problem delegating, and they're working in their weaknesses. So they're going to dump all their stuff on the peaceful so that they don't have to be bothered with it. And finding the easy way can also be perceived as lazy. And if they're in the weaknesses, could actually be lazy. And as Michelle said, and thank you, Michelle, you just said what I didn't scroll up to see yet. They get run over by more powerful coworkers. Absolutely. Valerie said, easygoing, people take advantage of them. Yes. And we talked about John's avoiding disagreement. Jordan said, peaceful and agreeable. They say yes to everything, which is not always beneficial to the organizational development. Absolutely. And then many times when they say yes to everything, they don't get it done, do they? Because they're going to find the easy way, they're going to be laid back, and it's not going to get done the way we would like it done. And John said when they're agreeable, sometimes they even deny their own views because if you want to convince me of that, I'm going to go with John today. It's Thursday. And then tomorrow Eva comes in and I think, oh, but Eva's got a good point. And they can be very wishy-washy. And as Eva said, when they find the easy way, they sometimes miss important details. Yes, Alyssa, gosh, this scroll bar, if it popped up right in front of me, we would be great minds thinking alike, I think, because Alyssa's just said what I said, can be wishy-washy. Yes. Karen said confrontation is not their forte. That's a good way to put it, Karen. And Melody said witty, dry sense of humor comes across as rude and insulting. Yes. And Gail said peaceful and agreeable, avoidance of the issues, actually, and passive, like John said. So understand that if you are this person and you are working your strengths to such a point where you think, oh, but I'm easygoing. I have a friend who is this category to the point where she has made herself sick with an ulcer, agreeing with people who have taken extreme advantage of her to the point of thousands of dollars. And I talk with her, I try to walk her through some of these things, and she said, I just don't want to face the conflict. Well, if somebody's taking my money, I don't consider that conflict. I consider that taking advantage of me. So it's really hard if we're working in our weaknesses to help people see that that's not going to serve them well. To help yourself see if any of these weaknesses apply to you, and I suspect at least some of them do, they certainly do to me, but to help ourselves see that that's not serving us well. When we're going along on our strengths and we're feeling really good and we're feeling so good about it, we're going to push it even more, and then we go over into our weaknesses. Yes, they don't want to go, don't want to rock the boat, and that goes with hiding emotions and all of that. And the sad part is this lady gets very frustrated and she will be really sarcastic and she'll tell you she loves sarcasm because it's such an art. And that's not it at all. She loves sarcasm because it helps her express her frustrations without being direct about it, but the people she's expressing it to never pick up on it. So it doesn't really benefit her except for her to sound really angry and miserable almost. So just be aware of all of these. Whether you're popular, powerful, perfect, or peaceful, we all have those weaknesses that we can fall over into, and our coworkers have those weaknesses too. So we need to not necessarily use that as an excuse even for our coworkers, but at least it gives us an understanding of where they're coming from. And that's the whole point about what we're talking about today. So I think you all mentioned all of these. The consistent part, they don't like a lot of change and chaos, which is one of the reasons that some peacefuls in today's library are getting more frustrated than they used to. Because even 10 years ago, we weren't experiencing the upheaval that libraries experience pretty much on a, let's say, monthly or quarterly basis nowadays. When you're talking about librarians needing to give injections of Narcan for opioid overdoses and things like that, when you're talking about librarians needing active shooter training, all those kinds of things that we would not have imagined even 10 years ago. The peacefuls that were drawn to the library environment are now very ill at ease with all of those things going on. They can adjust. We all can adjust, can't we? That's what I said when I said earlier, we can adapt and pull out the parts of our behavioral tendencies that we need in our jobs. But if we don't step back and see where that disconnect is, it's going to be tougher for us to do that, to be able to adapt. So thinking about decisions, pick one of them, either the popular, the powerful, the perfect, or peaceful. As a matter of fact, let's do the popular one together and I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. It's helpful for you to know how your coworkers think, isn't it? So a popular might make decisions very spontaneously, impulsively. What's popular? What's going to make everybody happy with the decision that they make? That might be how a popular tends to make decisions when they're doing it sort of on the go. Now, if they step back and say, I have a tendency to do this and I need to give it much more careful thought, I need to be a little more analytical, that's great. But in the scheme of things, when life is going fast, we tend toward our basic styles. So out of the other three, the powerful, perfect, or peaceful, how do you think they make decisions? Type the tendency, powerful, perfect, peaceful, and then type how you think they make decisions, just a brief word or phrase. I see lots of you are typing. That's good. Peaceful, to please everyone, absolutely. If they make a decision at all, right, Eva? because they'd rather not even be pushed to making a decision, which makes it challenging for them to be a leader or a supervisor. Michelle said the perfect makes a list, exactly, pros and cons. John said the powerful takes their time. Sometimes they do. It's their time. That's the key word there. They usually make it alone, don't they, John? Sometimes they can be pretty quick and decisive. Remember, we talked about them seeing the big picture. They will base their decisions on the big picture and they'll make it pretty quickly. It may or may not be the best decision, but they see that big picture and that's kind of what they go with. Joanne said they postpone it or give it to someone else. And I'm thinking the peaceful is what you're talking about there. And Kim said, powerful makes a decision regardless of what everyone wants. That's very true a lot of times. And Kathy said, without input from others, very true. Thomas said what everyone wants could be the popular or the peaceful, right? And Elaine says the peaceful is going to include all. Yes. They want other people to actually make that decision. John said he was thinking of perfect. Okay, thanks, John. I appreciate that. Yes, exactly. They are going to take a long time, the perfect is. You're right, because they're going to analyze it to death. Now, I will say that many times when they make that decision, it is extremely thorough. However, sometimes the real opportunity has passed by then, hasn't it? So there's kind of a dichotomy there of what's really going to be effective, but they will be very thorough. And again, the powerful does it without input from others. So you start to see that there are some major differences between you and your coworkers depending on which style is highest for you. Some of your coworkers you may just fit right in the same groove, and some of you may think they're coming from Mars because it's so different from the way you do things. As you all said, decisive, quickly, and alone for the powerful. And the perfect, slowly and deliberately based on the facts, statistics, details. Then let's go back and do an Excel spread chart on it. All those kinds of things to make sure it's perfect. And the peaceful checks with others so they don't rock the boat if they make the decision at all. This is one of the reasons that peacefuls have a hard time managing other people because not only do they have trouble with the decision itself, but when it's a disciplined decision, then throw in the quote confrontation piece and they will avoid that at all costs at the cost of the morale of their own department because they don't want to be faced with that. So you've got a really good picture of how they make decisions, and it's helpful to understand that because the person sitting next to you may not make those decisions the same way you do. So we're talking about page 3 now, their greatest fears. I'm just going to walk through these with you and see if they would match up what you're thinking. The popular sanguine's greatest fear is not being liked. I have a friend who's very high in this category. She's a training friend. We both have a mutual client. She called up our client one day and she left her a message and she said, I'm just wondering, I haven't heard from you for over a month. Don't you love me anymore? And I'm thinking to myself as a powerful, who would ever say that to a client? But then I stepped back and I said, of course, that's exactly how she felt. She felt unloved because the client hadn't been in touch. The client is more powerful. And so in her mind, I'll get in touch with you when I need you. She wasn't offended by it because she knew her very well and she knows her style. We teach this stuff, so she knew her style, but not being liked is a major concern for people who are high in this category. Powerful choleric, their fear is not being in control. I was just talking to a family member today. I have several critically ill family members for some odd reason right at this moment. And he was saying, you know what's really hard? I can't fix this. And I said, gotcha. When my husband was so sick, it was the thing that I struggled with every single day. I wanted to find a way to fix anything that came up. So the powerful struggles with not being in control. Well, guess what? You may have powerfuls working with you that really aren't allowed to be in control because it's not their job. Or you may have a peaceful that's the manager and the powerful is underneath and the powerful runs everything because they can. So it's really helpful to be aware of that dynamic sometimes. The perfect melancholy is afraid of not being right. And if you give them any feedback at all, it feels like criticism. And they dread that. I struggle with this piece. My first issue is not being in control because I am a powerful, but I'm fairly high in the perfect melancholy category. And when people give me feedback, I'm going to tell you, I'm probably 79.7%. Notice that perfect percentage, which is made up, by the way. But I'm so much better than I was 15 years ago before I started studying these behavioral tendencies because I understand myself now. So now when somebody gives me feedback, whether they give it to me bluntly, tactlessly, whatever, I'm a lot more likely to step back and take the good from that and use it to become a better person. 10, 15 years ago, before I started studying this, I just would have been hurt and disregarded it, figuring they didn't know what they were talking about. You know me, many of you know me. I'm very transparent. I learn as much from the things that I help you with as you do. So I always like to tell people this is what I've learned about myself, that now I can take constructive criticism. And if it's truly just being critical to be critical, I'm able to dismiss that now. But before I would get hurt, I was sensitive. The peaceful struggles with too much change and chaos, and of course, the confrontation and things that go along with that. So it's just helpful for us to understand that about ourselves. So let's get a little snapshot of these people. On page 3 of your handouts, if you want to just write the appropriate word in each box, and I'll give you an example here. A says which two are task oriented. So if you're thinking about it, sometimes the process of elimination is helpful. And if you look at those 4 words, I'm going to say tasks would definitely be perfect, right? And probably powerful because they're not really concerned about people too much. So let's take a look at that. The ones that are people oriented are the populars and the peaceful. Think about that. Peaceful people like things to be peaceful. So they're going to be tuned in to what's going on with the people around them. The powerfuls and the perfects are very focused on tasks. So once you start filling in these boxes, you are going to have a very succinct and concise snapshot of who these folks are, and you'll be able to recognize some of these tendencies in your coworkers. Again, not to manipulate, not to put them in a box, but for better understanding in your workplace. So looking at this and doing a process of elimination, if we're thinking about a watcher and a talker and a thinker and a doer, the doer we're going to know probably is the powerful, right? The thinker probably is the perfect. The talker is probably the popular. And the watcher would be the person that's sitting back, absorbing everything. And that's one that we're a little bit less likely to notice because they are sitting back. We kind of think that they're not paying attention, that they really don't know what's going on. And yet, in many instances, the peaceful, who is that watcher often, is the one that is most in tune and has an intuition about the dynamics that are underlying what's going on. If you're having a meeting and maybe tempers are rising and people are saying certain things, the peaceful watching, not saying much, is more intuitive about what people are actually feeling and who's angry at somebody else and those kinds of things. So it's helpful to use these talents, if you will. If the powerful is the doer and you need something done by tomorrow afternoon, it might be logical to give it to the powerful. If you need somebody to go out and talk to the Chamber of Commerce, the popular might be your best choice. If you need somebody to really sit and try to figure out what's going on with a certain situation, the perfect melancholy might be able to think that through. And if you need somebody's intuition, it might be the peaceful person you would want to go to. So we don't want to do without any of these folks. We just want to tap into those strengths that we've been talking about. So I'm going to throw this one back at you. Type in one of those styles, if you will, one of the tendencies, and which piece of the puzzle do you think they fit? Support, creative, detail, or leading? And you can choose any one of them, popular, powerful, perfect, or peaceful. Then which part of that puzzle do they fit? And by the way, while everybody's typing, I just want to thank you for your participation today because when people participate, they learn at such a deeper level. So I want to thank you for that because you've all been very willing to participate. You're sharing information with other people that they might not have thought of. So I want to thank you for that. My scroll bar quit scrolling, so I'm going to go over here and scroll it manually. Oh gosh, it quit scrolling quite a while ago. I apologize for missing some of those comments. It usually pops up by itself. Yes, Karen, just to answer that question that you had, I don't know how long ago, thinking about herself, she said, can we share certain characteristics of more than one personality? You will. I've only had one person ever that took this test and only scored in two categories. He said he didn't have any in the other two categories. And he was, I'm going to say, of a certain age. So I think what had happened was he had determined to be that way over the course of his life, which is workable and doable. We can adapt. But I really think that somewhere at his core, he probably had at least a little bit of the other two as well. So I believe we all have at least a smidgen of each one of these. Marcia said the powerful is the leader, absolutely. And John said the powerful takes the lead, whether they're supposed to or not, right, John? And Eva said the support person is the peaceful, yes. Marcia said the perfect is the detailed person, all of the above, yes. And Ernestine said the same thing. And the creative then becomes the popular. The creative, I think, is the most challenging one to guess here, which is why that process of elimination works so well. But when we talk about them being the creative person coming up with big ideas and being flexible and all those kinds of things, it naturally fits. And as Jardine said, yes, the peaceful person typically is the support person. Many years ago, when I was in charge of about 15 or 16 people, there was a lady in my department who was our support staff, and she did a phenomenal job at that. So I kept trying to get her promoted to work on the phones, and she kept saying, Linda, I don't want to work on the phone. And I said, but you'll get more money and you'll get more recognition. And as a powerful, that seemed like good enough reasons to me. Then when I started learning about this, I thought that's why she never wanted to go on the phone, because she was a peaceful person. She liked what she did. She supported all of us, and she stayed in that position for over 20 years. And I admire that because she knew who she was. And I think that's phenomenal. So the support person absolutely is a peaceful. Yes, you've got them all. Great job, everybody. And detail, yes, perfect. And Thomas said, are the categories typically blended into popular, powerful, peaceful, perfect? Great question, Thomas. And typically they're blended into whatever's next to each other. So you can have a blend of popular, powerful, or if powerful is the highest, it might be powerful, popular. So if they're next to each other, they can be one can be higher and the other one can be the secondary either way. Then yes, powerful, perfect is a very natural combination, but somebody might be a perfect, powerful, still next to each other on the grid. Very natural combination. Perfect and peaceful are very natural combinations. Or they might be higher and peaceful, but their secondary would be perfect. And the peaceful and popular are very natural combinations because they're very people oriented. So that was a great question, Thomas. Thank you for bringing that up. But yes, there are some typical blends. There are what's called unnatural blends, which a lot of times, if we can really dig a lot deeper with that particular person, it comes out as the fact that they're masking in a certain area, which just means for some reason they feel that they need to behave a certain way, even though it wouldn't be their natural tendency. I first came across this particular assessment when I was doing marriage mentoring with my husband at our church, and we took the assessment. We both scored highest in powerful. The leaders of the group asked us why we were still married because two powerfuls sometimes don't always get along, which I thought was funny. And then the first couple that we got, actually the second couple we got, very young couple. She still lived at home with mom and dad. She was an elementary school teacher. When we gave her the assessment, she scored 10, 10, 10, and 10. And I think what had happened partly was she felt that that would be a great score, if I'm just even across the board. But as we dug deeper, what we started to hear was she behaved one way at home with mom and dad because she'd lived there all of her life, through college, through her teaching job. She behaved another way at school when she was teaching the little kids. She behaved another way with her fiance. And maybe the other person was who she really was. We actually went to the pastor and said we would recommend counseling before they get married, because when she finally figures out who she is, it may not be the person he thought he was marrying. So she really need to get a handle on her true self. So it was a really interesting process. I don't know whether they ever got the counseling. That wasn't part of our job, but anyway. So you all got that right. Creative, leader, support, and detail. So good job. Then who wants to get it done? And I want to just say something here that can be a very easy way to remember these folks. And I consider item D as their life motto. So when you're thinking about it, the popular wants to get attention. They love people laughing and joking and having fun and partying and all those kinds of things, and they want to be at the center of that. That's perfectly fine. The powerful wants to get it done, and sometimes that requires kind of ignoring people and details and so forth. And if they're working in their strengths, that's a positive attribute. The perfect wants to get it right, and who can argue with that? Yes, if they're working in their weaknesses, it can be overdone, but these are all good things. But if you think about it, it's kind of how each style moves through life. The peaceful wants things to be peaceful, so they want everybody to get along. So it's all good. My popular friend is has some not second highest score, but pretty high up there on the peaceful. And when we first started working on this many years ago, she said, I think the popular just wants everybody to get along. I said, now think about that. And she started giggling. And she said, I know we like attention. So it's just one of those things that there's nothing bad about any of this, is there? It's when we overdo it that it can become challenging. So I'm going to I think you all had that completed. And if you didn't, you can email me and we can complete it for you. But we've gone through what you see there on the screen. So how do they handle project management? Because if you're working with a coworker and they're working differently than you and you're getting frustrated, just understand the popular holds the project very loosely. The timelines, the deadlines, the dollars that are allowed to be spent, those kinds of things can escape them pretty easily. So if you understand that going in, maybe the money or the deadlines aren't the pieces that you give to the popular. The powerful would handle a project by setting the goal, delegating the pieces, controlling it, getting it done. Now, when I say controlling, if they're working in their strengths, it's not micromanaging. It's just making sure everybody's got their assignments. They know when things are due. We pull it all together at the end, and bingo, we've completed our project. So that's kind of how they handle project management. The perfect with a project goes into detailed analysis and a step-by-step process, which is wonderful. And sometimes you have to give them deadlines as well, or they will keep the detailed analysis going along with the step-by-step processes. But if you're working with somebody and this isn't your style, it can drive you crazy. But if you know up front, you're expecting it. Maybe you move your deadline back a little bit because you know the details will get in the way. And the peaceful needs those guidelines and deadlines and checkpoints and expectations because they get pulled away from it and they're so easygoing, they'll go do whatever anybody asks them, even though your piece of this project was supposed to be done at 2 o'clock today. They got distracted by something else. So make sure you make those guidelines clear and have them in writing. And sometimes you have to have checkpoints that you wouldn't have to have necessarily with a powerful or a perfect. You might have to have those checkpoints. And then how do they deal with change at the top of page 4? The popular says, bring it on. Let's have some fun with it. Let's try it. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, we can always change it. So for the popular, change is not a big deal. For the powerful, they're making the change, so it's okay with them. They don't particularly like to have changes made to them or for them, but if they're in the middle of the change, they decide on it, they're good with it. The perfect says, why do we have to do this? Everything was perfect. It wasn't broken. Why are we changing it? So think about this. If you're the one instituting change, this is what people are thinking, whether they're saying it to you or not. And the peaceful says, I don't care how much you change as long as it doesn't affect me, or you don't expect me to take responsibility for it, or I don't have to lead the change, or whatever it is, because it's not peaceful if they have to be in the midst of leading change. So you have gotten a very in-depth process here. So I know we're running out of time, and I'm going to ask Erin for permission, if I could, because we got into some really good discussions. Could I email this last section to everybody, Erin? Would that work for you? Because I don't want to rush through it so fast. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't want to go through it so fast. This is really good information that can help you throughout life, and I don't want to whiz through it so quickly that you don't get it. So I'm going to send this piece to Aaron today and just have him go ahead and send it out to everybody that registered for the program. I do want to ask you before we end up, since we have just a couple of minutes, and that's not enough time to do that whole last segment of how you can communicate with them, but I do want you to turn to page 5 if you've got your handouts ready. And just put on there, I'm going to scroll through these very quickly. Please don't try to write anything. I'll send those to you. That doesn't usually happen, but we had some really good discussions today, so I appreciate your patience with that. What will you need to be particularly aware of when you're dealing with other styles? That's the question I want you to think of. That's at the bottom of page 5. What do you think would be helpful for you? Karen, what part of part 2 is that? Can you let me know exactly what you need, and I'll make sure that comes out as well. But think about this. As I said, if you have even a little bit of an understanding about the 4 styles, it's going to make your life move so much easier, not just at work, although I know this is a work webinar, but think about how this can impact how you interact with friends, how you impact with the people that you live with, how you impact with people on committees, all of those kinds of things. Yes, Karen, we could have done that. We don't usually get into good discussions like you all have done. You all, and I'm serious, have participated more than most classes that I have on webinars, because even when we have 20 or 30 people on a webinar, a lot of people are absorbing the information and not really participating. So again, I thank you for doing that because it was so much richer that way. But yes, the next time I probably should make this a 2-part series, but I will get you the rest of this information. Rosemary said she needs to have patience with people, which I think would all be helpful for us. Karen said, believe it would be useful to understand myself first. That's huge, Karen, because a lot of people will take this information and start pointing fingers at other people. And that's not really helpful, because unless we understand our own strengths and weaknesses, then we're not going to be able to interact with them any differently, are we? So understanding people's styles is very helpful. And Marcia said, yeah, that's the popular part. And Ernestine said, understanding their styles. Again, never wish to use this as information for evil, if you will, but for information that will help you interact better with your coworkers. Melody said, I pray for patience with both coworkers and patrons before I ever enter the building. There you go. And taking the time, that's exactly right, Jordane. We have to take some time to think about this stuff, don't we? It doesn't take hours a day. Once you get in the habit of just thinking, oh, you know what? I bet Deb's a popular, or I bet Deb's a perfect, and I bet that's why she spends so much time analyzing this. Again, it doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it certainly helps you understand them better, doesn't it? I want to say thank you to everybody that was here today and for participating at such a deep level. It was wonderful. And I'll get those slides to Erin today, and you'll be able to complete your worksheets. Thanks, everybody. If you need me, by the way, my email address is on the front page of your handouts, and you are welcome to email me at any time. That's what I'm here for. Thanks again, and I'll drop you an email in a couple of weeks as a follow-up to this. Thanks again, everybody.
And thank you, Linda, for an informative webinar. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on Thursday, April 12th for What Library School Didn't Teach You. Let's get organized. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or look for your message from the various listservs. Thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your